Hey guys, I want to talk about Thunk, Redux Thunk. Get your Thunk on. So Redux Thunk is a way, it's really to do with actions. It's a middleware for Redux. You saw how we applied it in an earlier video, so I think it was in this file. You need to apply it as a middleware like we're doing here. And it is one of a few libraries, and there are lots of different solutions to this. Thunk is kind of a lowest common denominator solution. There are others. I found I'm not a massive so the first thing to say about Thunk is I'm not actually a ridiculously big fan of it. It's okay. It solves an important problem. It still messed with me for a little while when I was learning this stuff. So I'm going to show you how Thunk works. It's very flexible and it can solve almost any problem you have. So it solves 3 problems: dispatching more than one action at a time, dispatching actions after some sort of delay, so maybe a network call comes back or something, you do a HTTP request and you get the answer back from the server in, maybe 2 seconds. And the third thing it solves is if you want to get the state, and this is quite an important thing as well, you want to get the state in an action. So you're inside an action, so maybe take add to do, right? So add to do has the to do passed in here. But we kind of already have the to-do that's in state, because if you remember this example, so to show you an example of how add to-do works and the state of the store. So if we have a look now, I'm about to add this. If we look in the store, if we look in currently editing to-do, the to-do's already here, right? It's already there. And so I guess in this case, you can get it in the reducer, so it's not a big deal. But there are cases where it's actually really useful in the action. I'll show you with some examples. So let's say when they add a to do, we want to delay it by a couple of seconds. So I'm just going to code this live for you guys. So we're going to bring in Lodash. If you're not familiar with Lodash, it's pretty important to, I think, a lot of programming that people do, because JavaScript's core libraries are a bit weak. So we're going to delay something by 2 seconds. So the way this delay function works is you pass a lambda in, something you want to do, and you pass the number of milliseconds, so this 2 seconds worth of milliseconds. So in 2 seconds, this will happen, right? So let's just prove that that's working. Cool. So let's refresh that. Helps if you actually put all the brackets in. So we add it, and in it comes. And there's the delay. So you saw there was a bit of a delay. Let me add another one for you in case you missed it. So yeah. So we're gonna see here the delayed add to do. So we're gonna see here the console delaying the delayed console. So we're gonna see here the delayed console.log after we add. So there's the add, and there's the log. So what if you wanted to dispatch an action after some amount of time? This might seem like a contrived example, but it's really not, because what's super common is that you want to do like a HTTP request, or like a fetch, or whatever you want to call it, and that will come back with in a lambda like this after some period of time, like maybe a second or a few hundred milliseconds. And you get some data, and a super common thing you want to do is load that data into Redux, into your Redux store, because most real apps in the real world go and get data from APIs or some other source. Okay. How do we dispatch it? So you can dispatch it using Thunk. So I'm going to show you how that works. So you don't actually need to import Thunk, which is a little bit weird, because what Thunk does is you can still do it this way and it will still work like this, just return a thing, but you can also return a special type of lambda like this. So this is where it gets a bit weird, because now you're like, oh, I've got a function and now I'm going to return a lambda from inside my function. What's going on? So I guess to start off with, let's just convert the existing example into a quick thunk. And see how that goes. Right, so let's get rid of that. Did that. So I've just got rid of the delay for now. So now we're returning. Right, so return, and then we're saying a lambda. Right, so that's this lambda, and then inside, so we've got a param here which are called dispatch. Now this is a function. When you call it, you can dispatch, and you just pass in a an object like normal. So you can dispatch like that. So let's just quickly prove that that works. So this was in add to do. So when the Chrome debugger stops hating on me. So we'll add one in here. Right, and that still worked. So that's cool. So we're back to where we were. So now let's maybe do it twice. Let's do it twice and see what happens. So now we're gonna so this is something you just couldn't do like this, because you return, as soon as you return, right, no code can go here to line 13 where I am now. So you're done. So there's nothing you can do. You can only return one thing from a method. It's like a fact of life in this. So now you've got two dispatches. Dispatching the same thing twice. So when we add something, let's add hello in, it adds it twice. That's kind of interesting. So you can see it did do it twice. Now the app's actually not set up to handle that very well. So that's kind of interesting. I wasn't necessarily expecting that to happen, but I realize now why it did happen. So yeah, that's something you can do. So let's try and delay this. Take that. So rather than console.log delaying, so now we say delay, and then in the lambda we're like, okay, we'll dispatch something and we're going to delay it by 2 seconds. So now what we should see is when we reload this, we'll type hello, we'll press add, ready, pressed it now. 2 seconds later, you get your action and everything proceeds as normal, but there's a delay. So that's very powerful. It kind of seems a bit boring, but that's pretty important. So there's a second thing you can do with dispatch, which is you can add a second parameter here, and I'll quickly show you what this does. It's pretty useful in quite a lot of cases. The most common case I use it is if you're going to do some sort of query to an API, but you need to grab out something from the state quickly. So maybe it's an ID, or maybe like, let's say you're building Facebook, and you've got that search bar at the top, and the users entered like, zdev into the top box. You'll have zdev in Redux state, right? And now they've pressed enter, so we're going to go and do the search. You're going to fire an action because they've pressed enter, and you want to go grab some data from an API. Now, one of the things you're obviously going to want to pass to that search API is what they entered in the box, which is in Redux state. So it's pretty useful in your action to be able to dip into the whole store and grab a part of that state and then use it to maybe query an API or like do something. So let's have a look what happens when we console log the whole thing. Right, so it's just logged it. So immediately logs it. You get the whole thing. If you want to know, what the current tech, you can get that. So that's a useful thing as well. Like, it's kind of not related to the core functionality of Redux Thunk in a way, but it is pretty handy. So Redux Thunk really is, if you want to get the state, then it's useful. If you want to dispatch more than one action, it's useful. And if you want to dispatch some of those actions asynchronously, then that's also useful. I'll show you a pattern quickly that we use an awful lot in a lot of the apps we build. So we'll say something like this. So maybe like, there's some sort of asynchronous thing that's going to come back in a bit with some data. So what we might do is we would call that add to do success. And maybe like there'll be some sort of error, maybe something goes wrong in here. Like, let's quickly do this instead. Right, so like, obviously this code won't actually run, but it's kind of interesting because it's really common. So let's say like this is what happens if you have some error. If you have some error, you'll go in there. If you don't have some error, you'll come in here, right? So we would normally do something like this. So we will suffix these names with like the different cases. So if it's an error, then you're gonna, you know, maybe you put something in there. If it's a success, you do what we're normally doing, and then right off the bat at the beginning, we normally do like a request, like this. Probably no payload. So so you come in here, you say I'm going to add a to do. Immediately this gets fired right off the bat, and then after some data comes back or you hit your API or whatever, if it's an error, then you get the error thing. So then you can maybe load an error message right into the Redux store. You can watch for this error in Redux with one of those case statements, and you can say you can have like an error thing in the store, and you can set error to be true, or you can set an error message in somewhere. Maybe based on, maybe an error came back from the API, so maybe you can pop that in there or whatever. If success happens, then you'll load the data that came back maybe. So that's like a very common pattern. On request, what's really useful is you can set a loading flag in your reducer to be false. And when success and error come back, then you set loading to be true, sorry. And then when error and success come back, you set loading to be false. We do that all the time. So what happens is immediately this gets fired, so loading will be true, and then when it finishes and it comes back and one of these two happen, then loading will be false. So then you set your component to show a spinner if loading's true, and that's how you do like a loading thing, and it's like very robust and it will like always work. So that's like a very common sort of paradigm that we follow with this stuff. It's super useful, and Redux Thunks really good at doing this stuff, because you can dispatch multiple things. Because if you're doing something asynchronously, ultimately there's often going to be 2 or 3 things you're going to want to dispatch. Like I started doing it, it finished successfully, or it finished and there was an error. Maybe more, I don't know, but that's like pretty common. Yeah, so that's really Thunk. There's one more thing, which is that you can inline this. I don't know whether this is a good idea or not. It's kind of up to you. I've started doing it more because I got really bored of doing it the way we just saw, and it just takes up a lot of lines. So this means the same. So you're like to do arrow, and then you immediately return another lambda. So you can also do that if you want. I don't know if that makes it better. Another thing which is quite common, if you have 2. Let me quickly show you one. If you have 2 of these in the same file like this, what's quite common is you might want to, so I'll convert this one too. Let's say you wanted to call one from the other. You can do that. It doesn't feel like the most super obvious thing in the world, but you can call one action from another action, which helps keep your code dry. So you can do that in this case. So add to do takes a to do, so like you'd pass like your to do in here, let's say for the sake of argument, and then it takes a dispatch and a get state. So you can call it like this, and that will work. It's not super obvious. It's not pretty. I don't know if there's a better way. And probably is a better way, and maybe someone in the comments will come back and say, "Oh, Rich, you're doing it completely wrong." But you can do it. So you can keep these things dry if you want, even though it's a little bit ugly.